My name's Charles Critchell and I'm the founding director of Fair City, a London-based city transport think tank and social enterprise. In the run-up to the London 2021 mayoral elections, I'll be interviewing candidates on the transport, urban and environmental issues which matter to Londoners. However, unlike the traditional interviews held in the back of a black cab, I'll be inviting candidates to join me in the front of a cargo bike, courtesy of cargo bike logistics company Pedal Me. Our second candidate is Luisa Porritt. Luisa is a former MEP, a current Camden councillor, and the Liberal Democrats mayoral candidate. And riding for us today, we have Ben Knowles, the CEO and co-founder of Pedal Me. So guys, you ready?
Okay. Ready to go.
Hi Luisa, so you said that your vision for London is unique in that you're the only candidate focused on life in the capital beyond the pandemic. However, for many Londoners to better understand how the decisions of tomorrow may be informed by the issues of today, perhaps you could start by telling us what you consider to be the single largest transport change in London this last year.
So I think one of the biggest transport changes we've seen in the last year, obviously, is less use of the tube and bus network. And although we expect that people will start using it again as restrictions ease and it gets safer with more vaccinations underway, I do think that the trend of home working, which has been sped up during the last year, is here to stay permanently. Businesses and organisations all over the capital are saying they're going to move to a more hybrid style of working where their employees will spend some of the time working from home, some of the time working in the office. And that means a lot of things are going to change in our city, including more empty office space coming onto the market, but also people won't be using the tube and bus network like they were before. So Transport for London won't be able to rely on the income from fares that it did in the past. And the next mayor really needs to have a plan for that. And so what I'm proposing is a fairer pay-as-you-go road pricing scheme so that our road network is brought into the system of charging to raise revenue for TfL.
Oh no, excellent. Okay, thank you. So one of the key changes of the last year, as you rightly pointed out, is the emergence of new work and leisure patterns, resulting in people typically travelling less. Additionally, London's population is set to contract for the first time since 1988, as many Londoners have been unable to justify high rents and want better access to green space. Can you tell us about your plan, Homes in the Heart of the City, and how it could improve the lives of Londoners?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, again, with this trend of home working that's going to stay with us beyond the pandemic, we've got a once-in-a-generational opportunity to finally fix the affordability crisis here in London. There's going to be more empty office space available than ever, and there needs to be a strategic plan for what to do with that space, because otherwise areas of London risk being left to languish. And actually there's a diminishing amount of space, especially green space, to build on. So we should be making more use of the space we have already. So what I want to do with Homes in the Heart of the City is convert some of that empty office space into quality, affordable, zero carbon homes.
Excellent. So as you're probably aware, the London Plan 2021 was released in March, and it's the statutory document outlining how the mayor plans to develop the city over the next 5 years. So the plan was delayed for over a year because the government housing secretary ordered a number of changes. You have previously stated that you would request special powers from central government so you could rapidly implement Homes in the Heart of the City. How likely is it that you'll be able to achieve this?
Well, obviously that's going to require some negotiation with the government, but actually I think this is an opportunity to reset relations between the Mayor of London and the government. You know, I may not agree with a lot of the things that the government does. It wasn't my choice for there to be a Conservative government in place nationally, but the reality is they will be there until 2024, unless something radical happens. So the Mayor needs to have a constructive relationship with the government as well in order to get things done. It's not just about the direct powers that you already have as Mayor, but it's about how you work with other levels of government in order to achieve the best things for London. Whether that's central government or also local councils, are a really important part of the equation as well. So I would look for areas where there could be common ground. And actually, I think it's in the government's interest as well to see more homes created in London. That helps their targets nationally. So I do think this is something that could be sold to the government for the mayor to spearhead this process. They'll get some credit for it as well.
Okay, no, so of course it's not only central London, but high streets and local neighbourhoods across the capital which have been impacted by the pandemic. One idea which is gaining popular support in Paris is that of the 15-minute city, a planning model where essential city services are located within a 15-minute walk or cycle ride for every Parisian. If elected mayor, what plans would you introduce to revitalise high streets and engage with communities in improving neighbourhoods across London?
So I think it's really important at this crucial moment to have a plan for the future of our high streets. We're moving away from that old-fashioned retail-led model of high streets. It's very easy to get caught up in the negative coverage about the death of the high street and just seeing shops closing all the time. But actually, on a more positive note, what we have seen in the last year is people spending more time and money in their local areas because of this trend of home working. And as that's with us to stay, I think we've got a real opportunity to build on that and make our high streets fit for the future, places that serve the local community and their needs. So shifting to a more services-based model with more places to socialise, to eat and drink after work, more co-working spaces available locally for people who can't actually work from home that easily because they may not have the space to do so, and things like childcare services as well.
Okay, excellent. So an essential part of ensuring that communities can access local services in safe and sustainable ways is to provide high quality walking and cycling infrastructure for active travel. As the incoming mayor, you have become the chair of Transport for London and would be responsible for overseeing the London Street Space Plan, a programme which provides more space for people over motorised modes. If elected mayor, would you continue the programme? And if so, do you think the programme could be improved?
So you mentioned the 15-minute city model that's been successfully implemented in Paris and is being rolled out there. That's at the heart of my vision for London as well. I want to make every neighbourhood in London an attractive place both to live and to work. And you're absolutely right that integral to that model is making it easier to walk and cycle around all of London's neighbourhoods. So I'm a firm supporter of active travel. I think what we've seen in the last year with the scheme is there has been some backlash against specific schemes in different areas. There have been some that have been successful and implemented fine, but unfortunately, low traffic neighbourhoods, which have been around for a long time as a concept and been very successful, have got a bit of a bad name. So I think the one thing that could be improved is consultation. People don't like the feeling that changes are being imposed on them. So I think it's really important that you bring local communities along with you as much as possible in the process. And so I think the one thing that can be learned from the last year is making sure there is that consultation process with local communities, because actually there can be a positive benefit to that as well, where residents have their own ideas for schemes and we're missing out on ideas that come from within the community if we don't ask them. And I've certainly seen that from my experiences as a councillor in Camden.
Okay, excellent. And obviously the importance of better active travel infrastructure is that it provides all types of Londoners with an option for travelling safely. This is significant because transport planning has traditionally been biased in favour of men over the needs of others. If elected mayor, what steps would you take to promote a more inclusive and safer transport network which caters for groups which are currently marginalised?
Well, it's not just women that aren't as included in our transport network and planning. So there are a range of things that we need to do. I mean, one thing is we know that women are less likely to be cyclists. And I think there are a range of things we can do to encourage take-up by all Londoners, including ethnic minorities. And part of that is promoting more active travel and introducing more schemes, but actually we need to encourage people to change their behaviour in other ways as well and provide incentives. So one of the things that I want to do is introduce cycle-free Sundays, whereby the existing Santander bikes, you have cycle-free days already. That would mean that every Sunday Londoners would be able to take out bikes and use them for free. And the evidence over the last year has shown that when people try before they buy, they're more likely to change their behaviour permanently and then go and buy a bike themselves and become a cyclist. So that's one of the things that we can do. But there are other things that need to be done to make public transport safer for women as well. We know that women are more likely to be harassed on public transport. Sadly, we've heard a lot of those stories in the last few weeks. And actually, it's one of the reasons that I started cycling when I lived in Paris, because I was getting into more risky situations when I was on public transport. A lot of people will tell you that's about CCTV and things. I think it goes much deeper than that, and we actually need a culture change to root out misogyny from our society. So there isn't one simple solution to that.
Excellent, some really good ideas there. So I think Ben's now got a question for you on the Silvertown Tunnel, so I'll let him take it away.
Luisa, one thing that really concerns me is that there are areas of London where we're excluded from facilities as a cargo bike company that uses bikes, and that makes it very difficult for us to compete. So one example is in East London, we've got the Blackwall Tunnel, which provides a direct route for motor vehicles, which bikes are excluded from. And that means there's this whole black spot for us either side of the river, because although we're a more efficient way of doing logistics, we can't compete if we're kept off key bits of roads. And it looks like Silvertown Tunnel is also likely to exclude us. So what would your approach be to helping to mitigate for that, and what would you like to see happen with Silvertown Tunnel?
Well, first of all, I want to scrap the Silvertown Tunnel. I think it's completely the wrong direction. We're facing a climate emergency. If we're serious about reaching our objectives to be net zero in this city by 2030, then we shouldn't be building new motorways, which will only add more cars to the road. So I would get rid of that. It's a polluting project. It's going to cost Londoners over £2 billion. It's not where we should be investing. We should be investing in clean, green public transport. And actually what we could be doing instead of the Silvertown Tunnel is the rather high walking and cycling bridge, which would provide that east-west crossing and would mean companies like yours could make use of it.
Okay, excellent. So if we now turn to Hammersmith Bridge, another river crossing, but one located in the west of the city. Because of structural faults, the bridge was first closed to motorised vehicles in April 2019 and to all modes of transport in August 2020. What transport modes would you like to see the bridge reopened to? And if elected mayor, would you have any powers to speed up the process of reopening?
So, first of all, fixing the Hammersmith Bridge does require investment from central government. The cost has been estimated at £141 million. That's not something that local councils can foot the bill for, or the mayor's office for that matter. So the government needs to step in. This is a vital transport route for many Londoners to get to work, to get to school, you name it. So I think there needs to be an urgent temporary solution and a plan to get it permanently up and running again. At the moment, a ferry is being talked about. Well, that's what's going to be introduced in the short term. We would like to see a temporary walking and cycling bridge and potentially that becoming a permanent fixture as well. So Sarah Olney is the local MP for Liberal Democrat MP for North Kingston and Richmond Park, and she has been working hard on this with Gareth Roberts, the leader of Richmond Council, lobbying the government, urging them to do the right thing and step in, and working with Hammersmith and Fulham Council as well. I think there's a chorus of voices saying what needs to be done, so the government just needs to pull their finger out and help.
Okay, so a serious issue which disproportionately impacts younger people and London's most deprived communities is air quality. Introduced in 2019, the incumbent mayor's ultra-low emission zone is due to be expanded to cover the area between the North and South Circulars by October 2021. You have identified clean air as being one of your 3 key basic needs for all Londoners. So what steps would you take as the incoming mayor to improve the capital's air quality?
So the Liberal Democrats supported the introduction of the ULEZ, but actually what I think we need is a fairer pay-as-you-go road pricing scheme implemented across the whole of London, and actually to move away from this complex web of schemes that is emerging that disproportionately impacts some Londoners based on where they live or where they happen to need to go for work. It would be a fairer and greener system, actually, to charge people based on things like the length of journey that they make, the type of vehicle they have, and the level of emissions that produces. So I want a road pricing scheme across the whole of London, not all these different schemes like the congestion charge, the ULEZ, and potentially the boundary charge as well, which would disproportionately impact some poorer Londoners. It's much fairer that everyone pays something, and that will put our transport network on a much more sustainable financial footing.
Yeah. Well, as you've just touched upon there, funding is a major ongoing issue for Transport for London. And this is because, unlike other global cities, London's public transport network is reliant on a fare-based revenue model, which has struggled with low ridership as a result of the pandemic. So this has necessitated a series of government bailouts to keep services running. If elected mayor, what would be your strategy for generating revenue?
So firstly, I think that the government should have stepped in to support TfL during this emergency situation of the pandemic. It was unprecedented, that drop-off of income from fares, and the only reason that happened is that Londoners were doing the right thing by staying at home as the government instructed them to. And what the government has done, it has given guarantees to private rail companies outside of London during the course of the pandemic, but they haven't done the same thing for our capital city's public transport network. I think that's wrong, and we've been treated differently. But I also think that the mayor needs a plan for how to put TfL's finances on a more sustainable footing for the future. And that's where my smart road pricing scheme comes in, because that would make up for the loss of fares that I think is going to be a permanent fixture, and raise revenue from the road network as well.
Okay, excellent. So if we just stay with the issue of funding and fares, one of the stipulations of a future government bailout is that concessionary travel, including for over 2 million young Londoners, will have to be directly funded by the mayor. Would you propose keeping concessionary fares in place? And if so, how would you fund them?
I think it's absolutely vital that we protect free travel for under 18s. I think it's appalling that the government was putting this on the table in the negotiations in the first place. The Liberal Democrats have always campaigned against that, and I will always oppose it, and robustly against the government in any negotiations. But I think where perhaps we can move away from TfL having become a political football, as it has been in the last year, is by also coming to the government with a constructive plan for the future. So again, this is where I would propose the road pricing scheme for London and say, look, we need you to step in and help us in the short term, but I've got a plan to raise money for TfL in the medium to long term, which would avoid these sorts of negotiations having to take place with very negative concessions being put on the table. And I think that's something that government could be persuaded about, because actually Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has said that he'd potentially be in favour of road pricing being introduced throughout the whole of the UK. So I think London should be the first to trial that. And actually the research by Centre for London, an independent think tank, shows that that could not only meet the existing costs that TfL has, but potentially raise additional revenue as well, a surplus that we could then use to invest in more clean, green public transport projects.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. And I think Ben has now got a second question.
So, Luisa, one of the problems that we face as a company is that we, because of the way our company is structured, we've chosen to employ our staff, provide fair employment, and pay our way in tax. But our competitors, so the likes of Uber and City Sprint, so both on the taxi side and on the delivery side, have chosen to structure their companies in such a way that they outsource the responsibility for looking after their staff onto the individuals and onto the state. And that allows them to also not pay quite a chunk of tax. So something like 35% of our revenue goes on tax that our most our least correctly acting brethren in the sector pay. And that's a problem for us as a company because we're 35% more efficient because we use bikes, but that's being offset by this extra tax burden on us that isn't on our competitors. And we think that those companies should be being forced to act on behalf of their staff and on behalf of the needs of the country and pay their way. So this seems unfair. What are you going to do about it?
Well, obviously there are some things that TfL can do. We've already seen times when other competitors' licences, for example, have been threatened. So there are some powers and influence there. But I think this goes beyond the powers of the Mayor of London as well, realistically. And this is something where government also needs to be taking a firmer stance on companies, not just in the transport and logistics sector, but more generally, that aren't treating their workers fairly and paying them a fair wage, and where it's really difficult, therefore, for companies that are doing the right thing to compete. So the government needs to be addressing that, and will always be a strong voice, the Liberal Democrats as a party, in favour of the London living wage, for example, fair working practices and conditions and wages. So you can count on me to be a strong voice as Mayor for all of those principles and values, and also to set a standard through the contracts that the Mayor and the GLA agrees with companies that they work with.
Incredible, yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. So as well as being a Londoner, you've also lived in Paris, where the city's first female mayor, Anne Hidalgo, was re-elected last year. And as you say, successfully introduced, or was looking to introduce, 15-minute city. So how would you, as London's first female mayor, plan to make London's transport system more accessible, equitable and sustainable for all Londoners?
Well, there's so much that we need to do. There isn't just one thing. And for me, the most urgent crisis is cleaning up London's air. As you mentioned, I used to live in Paris. So I've lived in two capital cities, both heavily polluted, and I'm an asthmatic as a result of having grown up in London, lived here most of my life, and other than that, Paris, which is also very polluted. I'm really impressed by what Anne Hidalgo has been doing as mayor, and I think there's a lot we can learn from that model, particularly introducing the 15-minute city. But there's a series of things we need to do. First of all, scrapping the Silvertown Tunnel. That's going to add pollution, and that's not what London needs right now. We need to move towards a cleaner, greener public transport model. We need to invest in active travel. I want to also improve more green walking routes and connect those up around London to make it easier for Londoners and to encourage them to go on walks. We've all seen the benefits of that during the last year, and I think that's a healthy habit we should encourage people to continue with. I mentioned I'll introduce cycle-free Sundays, which will encourage more Londoners to become cyclists. Again, taking up a healthy habit and hopefully encouraging them to become cyclists in the longer run. And I'll also introduce a fairer pay-as-you-go road pricing scheme, which it will be much better because it will mean that our road network is part of how we raise money for TfL, putting it on a more sustainable footing for the long run, but also making sure that there aren't Londoners who are disproportionately impacted based on things like ethnicity and poverty by the existing web of schemes that we have.
Excellent. So, Louisa, finally, you've made a habit of upsetting the odds so far in your political career. What are the chances that you'll be on the 8th floor of City Hall in May?
Well, I would say don't write me off. The first time that I stood for election in 2018, I was a newcomer to politics. No one thought I'd be able to win my council seat, but I beat the incumbent Conservative councillor. When I stood for the European Parliament in 2019, no one thought that the Liberal Democrats would win London, which was also a proportional representational system like we have for the elections coming up in May. But we managed to elect 3 MEPs. I was the 3rd on the list, so I managed to go to Brussels to represent London then. So the Liberal Democrats have a habit of surprising people in elections, and so do I. And actually, Londoners have the opportunity with our electoral system to vote with their hearts, to vote for the candidate and the policies whose vision they most agree with. So I would encourage any Londoners who've seen this today, if they like what I have to offer, to vote for me and vote for the Liberal Democrats on all 3 ballot papers.
Excellent. Well, we're just at the end there, so thanks very much, Louisa, for joining us, and best of luck in the election.
Thank you.